The trillion-dollar fallout of German reunification. In 1990, West Germany made a critical decision that would haunt its economy for decades, converting East German currency at a 1-to-1 rate. In the industrial town of Bitterfeld, factories closed overnight as their products became impossibly expensive. Workers who had once prided themselves on skilled manufacturing suddenly found themselves unemployed, their economic futures erased with a stroke of a pen. 3 decades later, we're still witnessing the fallout. Areas once filled with thriving industries now struggle with persistent unemployment. Something unexpected has emerged from this economic distress, a political transformation sweeping through former East German regions. What connection might exist between these economic policies and today's polarized landscape? A tale of 2 Germanys. Imagine standing at the Berlin Wall in 1989. On one side, gleaming Mercedes sedans navigated smooth highways. On the other, smoke-belching Trabants puttered along cracked roads. This wasn't just a border between 2 political systems. It represented one of history's most dramatic economic divides within what had once been a single nation. The seeds of this division were planted in the rubble of World War II. After Germany's defeat in 1945, the Allied powers carved the country into occupation zones. As Cold War tensions escalated, these administrative boundaries hardened. By 1949, 2 separate German states emerged. The Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, aligned with Western democracies, and the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, established as a Soviet satellite state. Their economic starting points weren't equal. West Germany retained much of Germany's industrial heartland in the Ruhr Valley and benefited from its integration into Western markets. Meanwhile, East Germany bore the heavier burden of war reparations to the Soviet Union. Entire factories were dismantled and shipped east, with Soviet authorities extracting an estimated 30% of East German industrial capacity as compensation for war damages. What followed was like 2 paths diverging through a forest, one paved and well-maintained, the other increasingly rocky and overgrown. West Germany embraced the social market economy championed by Economic Minister Ludwig Erhard, combining free market principles with social welfare protections. This approach, coupled with substantial American investment through the Marshall Plan, approximately $1.4 billion, created the foundation for the Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle. East Germany implemented a Soviet-style centrally planned economy. Private businesses were nationalized, agriculture was collectivized, and production became subject to rigid 5-year plans determined by political leaders rather than market forces. The state told us what to produce, how much, and for whom, recalled Karl, a former factory manager from Leipzig. Innovation wasn't rewarded. Meeting a quota was all that mattered. The differences manifested in everyday life. By the 1960s, West Germans enjoyed widespread prosperity with rising wages and expanding consumer choices. Volkswagen Beetles and later BMW and Mercedes vehicles became symbols of West German middle-class lifestyle. A West German worker could purchase a refrigerator with about 1 month's salary, a luxury many East Germans wouldn't obtain for another decade. In East Germany, consumer goods remained chronically scarce. The waiting list for a Trabant could stretch 10 years. We joke that by the time your car arrived, your children would be old enough to drive it, remembered Greta from Dresden. Despite its shortcomings, the Trabi became emblematic of East German aspiration and industrial limitations. The productivity gap widened relentlessly. By 1989, West German workers produced 3 times more output per hour than their Eastern counterparts. This resulted from structural factors: outdated machinery, inefficient production methods, inadequate infrastructure, and misaligned incentives within the planned economy. East German factories operated with obsolete equipment. While West German companies continuously invested in new technologies, Eastern enterprises struggled with chronic underinvestment. The average machine in East German industry was 26 years old by the late 1980s, compared to just 12 years in West Germany. The communist leadership's emphasis on heavy industry came at the expense of innovation and consumer goods. East Germany devoted resources to showcase projects while neglecting basic infrastructure maintenance. Housing deteriorated, utilities went unrepaired, and transportation networks crumbled. Environmental conditions diverged dramatically. While West Germany implemented environmental protections in the 1970s, East Germany ran heavily polluting industries with minimal safeguards. By 1989, the eastern state had some of Europe's most contaminated regions. In Bitterfeld, we knew which way the chemical plant was by the color of the sky, said Thomas, who grew up near the industrial zone. The economic indicators revealed the growing divide. By 1989, West Germany's GDP per capita reached approximately 23,000 Deutschmarks, while East Germany struggled to achieve 12,000 Ostmarks based on official statistics. Independent economists later revealed these Eastern figures were significantly inflated. West Germans were likely 3 to 4 times wealthier than their Eastern counterparts. This disparity shaped everyday experiences. West German supermarkets offered abundant choices with fully stocked shelves. East Germans faced chronic shortages of basic items. When bananas appeared, word spread like wildfire, recalled Helga from Karl-Marx-Stadt, now Chemnitz. You drop everything to stand in line for hours. Telecommunications highlighted the technological gap. West Germany built a modern phone network where most households had private telephone lines. In East Germany, only about 15% of households had telephones by 1989, with waiting times stretching years or decades. Many relied on public phone booths for essential communications. The social welfare systems also diverged. While both provided universal health care and education, quality differences emerged. West German hospitals incorporated the latest technologies, while Eastern facilities often operated with outdated equipment. We became masters of improvisation, noted Dr. Mahler, who practiced medicine in Leipzig for 30 years. By the late 1980s, these divergent economic paths created fundamentally incompatible structures. West Germany operated a sophisticated, globally competitive market economy integrated into Western European trade networks. East Germany maintained a rigid command economy largely isolated from market forces, increasingly uncompetitive except through artificial exchange rates and subsidies. When the Berlin Wall fell in November 1989, these economic realities presented an unprecedented challenge, like trying to rejoin 2 roads that had been built to entirely different specifications. East German industries couldn't survive competition without protection, yet maintaining separate economic zones seemed politically unacceptable. The productivity disparities, technology gaps, and environmental degradation represented a chasm that couldn't be bridged overnight, or even within years. The fatal currency decision. In the weeks following the Berlin Wall's collapse, as euphoria gave way to practical concerns, German officials faced a monumental question: how to merge 2 incompatible monetary systems. The answer they chose prioritized political stability over economic reality, creating a financial time bomb that would explode across industrial towns throughout the former GDR. The currency conversion decision resembled a sudden economic storm that hit without warning. Imagine a factory worker in Dresden earning 1,000 East German marks monthly. After conversion, she would still earn 1,000 marks, but now in Western currency. Her purchasing power skyrocketed overnight, but her factory's costs soared simultaneously, threatening her very job. At the heart of this economic storm lay a critical question: what was an East German mark actually worth compared to the West German Deutsche Mark? The answer would determine the fate of millions of citizens' savings, wages, and the viability of entire industries. Most economists advocated for an exchange rate reflecting economic realities, between 3:1 and 4:1 for wages and prices. The East German currency had limited purchasing power outside its borders and represented productivity levels far below Western standards. The German Bundesbank proposed a 2:1 conversion rate for most transactions, which still valued the Eastern currency generously. But Chancellor Helmut Kohl faced intense political pressure. East Germans feared their life savings would vanish during the transition. As elections approached in East Germany, Kohl promised in February 1990 that East German citizens could convert their savings at a 1:1 rate, a politically brilliant but economically catastrophic decision. When currency union took effect on July 1, 1990, the conversion rules applied different rates to different transactions. Personal savings up to 4,000 marks converted at 1:1, while larger amounts received less favorable rates. Wages, pensions, and rent payments also converted at 1:1. Company debts, however, exchanged at 2:1, creating immediate accounting problems for struggling businesses. The implications were severe and immediate. East German labor costs jumped to 70% of West German levels, while productivity remained at only 30% of Western standards. This gap between wages and productivity rendered Eastern businesses hopelessly uncompetitive. The conversion effectively quadrupled the real cost of East German labor relative to its productivity, dooming most Eastern enterprises, even reasonably efficient ones. The mechanical, engineering sector illustrates this devastation. Before conversion, these companies exported machinery to Eastern Bloc countries on favorable terms. After July 1990, their prices quadrupled in convertible currency, making products prohibitively expensive compared to Western alternatives. Orders vanished almost immediately. Similarly, chemical factories around Bitterfeld and Luna saw production costs soar, while their products remained technologically inferior. Profitable enterprises became money-losing operations overnight. By September 1990, industrial production in East Germany fell by 50% compared to the previous year, dropping to less than one-third of pre-reunification levels by 1991. Unemployment, virtually non-existent under socialism, skyrocketed. VEB Robotron's collapse exemplifies this pattern. East Germany's largest electronics manufacturer, with 68,000 employees, produced uncompetitive but marketable computers for Eastern Bloc countries. After conversion, these became prohibitively expensive while remaining technologically obsolete. The company collapsed almost immediately, with most facilities closed within months. East German retailers faced similar fates. When currency became convertible, consumers rushed to purchase superior Western products. Local stores that once had queues despite limited selection suddenly stood empty. Within months, familiar East German brands disappeared from shelves. The currency decision created a painful paradox. It gave East Germans immediate purchasing power while destroying the economic foundation for their future income. Wages were briefly preserved at artificial levels that the underlying productive capacity could not sustain. The tragedy was its predictability. Bundesbank President Karl Otto Pohl warned Chancellor Kohl that the favorable exchange rate would exceed the performance capabilities of the East German economy and result in significant unemployment. Pohl later resigned in protest, accurately predicting that transfer payments would be needed for years to support the collapsed Eastern economy. The currency decision created distinct winners and losers. Pensioners benefited substantially, as their payments converted at 1:1 and gradually aligned with Western levels. Property owners gained as their real estate suddenly held value in Western currency. Industrial workers suffered severely, as employers could no longer afford their newly expensive wages. Some economists argue that a shock was inevitable, as many East German industries were too inefficient and environmentally destructive to survive in a market economy regardless of exchange rate. While partially true, the abrupt 1:1 conversion eliminated any possibility of gradual adjustment that might have allowed viable industries to adapt. The repercussions extended beyond economics. The collapse of East German industry created a profound psychological wound among East Germans. Their skills, education, and work experiences, their entire professional identities, were suddenly deemed inadequate or obsolete, contributing to a lasting sense of second-class citizenship that influences German politics today. Defenders of the conversion argue it prevented mass emigration that might have occurred if East Germans had seen their savings dramatically devalued. This argument has merit. The decision protected individual financial assets and provided immediate access to Western goods. However, it sacrificed long-term economic viability for short-term political stability. The privatization experiment. As East Germans counted their freshly minted Deutsche Marks, a seismic economic transformation was already underway. The privatization agency known as the Treuhandanstalt had begun what would become the largest corporate restructuring in history, a mission to transform 8,500 state-owned enterprises employing 4 million workers into private companies. What began with ambitious projections would soon spiral into one of the most destructive economic experiments of the modern era. The Treuhandanstalt, literally trust agency, was established in March 1990, initially under East German authority before the formal reunification. Its original mission statement spoke of saving viable businesses and making them competitive, with a focus on preserving jobs. Detlev Karsten Roeder, a respected West German executive, was appointed as its first president with a mandate to modernize the East German industrial landscape while maintaining its economic foundation. The agency's early financial projections were staggeringly optimistic. Treuhand officials estimated the combined value of East German state enterprises at approximately 600 billion marks, a figure that suggested privatization would generate substantial profits to fund Eastern reconstruction. Within months, this outlook collapsed under the weight of economic reality. When Treuhand officials began evaluating East German companies, they discovered facilities far more outdated than anticipated. Many factories operated with machinery from the 1930s and 1940s. Environmental compliance alone would cost billions. East German industrial sites had polluted unchecked for decades. At the chemical complex in Bitterfeld, groundwater contamination was so severe that cleanup costs were estimated at 10 billion marks for this single site, a rotting industrial foundation beneath the surface of East German enterprise. As the currency union took effect, the Treuhandanstalt's mission shifted. Political pressure mounted to privatize quickly rather than rehabilitate struggling enterprises. After Roeder was assassinated in April 1991, his successor Birgit Brühl accelerated privatization dramatically. The new mantra became privatization is the best form of sanitation, prioritizing speed over careful restructuring. Companies were placed on an auction block, with few serious buyers after the currency conversion made East German products uncompetitive. Those who did bid were primarily Western corporations looking to eliminate competition or acquire market share cheaply. The renowned Carl Zeiss Jena optical company, once employing 27,000 workers, saw its workforce slashed to 2,700 after its West German counterpart purchased the rights to the name. At Pentacon in Dresden, Europe's largest camera manufacturer, production lines for the respected Praktica brand were dismantled shortly after acquisition. They didn't just close our factory, recalled Dieter Hoffmann, a 30-year camera technician. They erased our history. I watched them toss precision equipment worth millions into dumpsters. Equipment we had maintained meticulously for decades. The East German electronics industry faced similar devastation. The semiconductor plant in Frankfurt an der Oder, despite employing 8,000 skilled workers with advanced chip technology, couldn't secure investors to maintain production. We went from making microchips to making nothing, said Renata Weber, a former engineer. In 1989, we believed we would modernize. By 1991, we understood we were simply being erased. By 1992, industrial production in East Germany had fallen by 73% from its 1989 levels. Unemployment skyrocketed to over 15% officially, with actual joblessness much higher when counting those in temporary work programs or early retirement. Some industrial regions saw effective unemployment reach 50%. The privatization approach created perverse incentives. Western companies acquired Eastern competitors without obligation to maintain employment or production. Many purchased competitors simply to eliminate them and capture market share. The psychological impact on East Germans was devastating as they watched their lifelong workplaces dismantled. First, they told us our money wasn't worth much, a steel worker at Eisenhüttenstadt told a journalist. Then they told us our work wasn't worth anything either. The process also created opportunities for fraud. Jürgen Schneider, a West German developer, acquired numerous properties through the Treuhand using falsified documents, securing over 6 billion marks in bank loans before fleeing the country. By 1994, when the Treuhandanstalt concluded its work, rather than generating the expected 600 billion mark profit, the agency had accumulated debts of approximately 270 billion marks, a financial crater absorbed into Germany's national debt. Of the 4 million jobs in East German state enterprises when the Treuhand began, approximately 80% disappeared. Entire industrial regions became economic wastelands. Horst Schultz, who worked 26 years at a chemical plant in Bitterfeld, described the transformation. Our factory was like a small city. We had 5,000 workers, a medical clinic, even our own orchestra. Now it's just an empty field. The buildings were demolished, so completely you wouldn't know anything was ever there. Defenders argue many East German enterprises were fundamentally unsalvageable, inefficient, polluting, and uncompetitive. Wolfgang Seibel later observed, the Treuhand did not cause the collapse of East German industry. It managed the collapse. Critics point to alternative models that might have preserved more industry. Austria emphasized gradual transition when privatizing nationalized industries. Poland implemented a more gradual program allowing companies time to restructure. The few East German success stories reinforce this critique. Jenoptik, spun off from Carl Zeiss Jena, survived because local officials established a state-owned holding company that protected it from immediate market pressures. The Mechanical Engineering Institute in Magdeburg was preserved through a management buyout supported by regional government. Perhaps the most revealing statistic about the Treuhand's legacy. More than 30 years after reunification, not a single company listed on Germany's DAX 30 stock index has its headquarters in former East Germany. The region remains economically dependent, with productivity approximately 20%, below Western levels despite trillions in transfer payments. The Great Eastern Exodus. Beyond the shuttered factories and economic statistics lay a demographic catastrophe that would reshape Germany for generations. When the wall fell, East Germans gained freedom of movement, and millions used this new liberty to vote with their feet in what became the largest internal migration in modern European history. The numbers tell a staggering story. Between 1989 and 1992 alone, approximately 1.4 million East Germans, roughly 10% of the entire population, packed up their lives and moved westward. The exodus disproportionately consisted of young, educated workers between 18 and 29 years old, precisely the demographic that represented the future economic potential of the region. These statistics represented real communities being hollowed out in real time. The industrial city of Hoyerswerda in Saxony embodies this transformation. Once a showcase socialist city built around energy and chemical industries, Hoyerswerda saw its streets grow quiet as families departed one by one. Schools that once bustled with children fell silent. Housing blocks emptied floor by floor until entire buildings stood abandoned. By the early 2000s, its population had plummeted from nearly 70,000 in 1988 to approximately 40,000, a 43% decline. Similar population collapses transformed dozens of eastern towns. Treuhandanstalt lost a third of its residents in just a few years. Weißwasser saw its population fall from 38,000 to under 20,000. What made this migration particularly devastating was its selective nature. The outflow followed a pattern sociologists call brain drain.